It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or just email me directly at Opperman Investigations. Okay, I'm really excited about our guest today. It's Frank Stanfield. He's a local Florida man from Lake County. You could find him on his website, which is Frank E. Stanfield. And we're talking about, you can find him also on Twitter, Frank Stanfield. And we're talking about his brand new book, okay? Vampires, Gators, and Wackos, A Newspaperman's Life. Mr. Stanfield, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for coming on such short notice for me. I really appreciate that. So tell us about yourself. Before we get into your book, Vampires, Gators, and Wackos, okay, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? Vampires, Gators, and Wackos. Oh, what do you call it? Tell us about yourself first. Who is Frank Stanfield?
Well, I've been a newspaper reporter for an editor for 40 years. I worked for the Orlando Sentinel. I work now for a paper called the Daily Commercial in Leesburg. And so I've just sort of collected all these stories over the years and sharing them with the readers.
Gotcha.
I also have a new book out besides this one. It's called Cold-Blooded, a true crime story of a murderous teenage vampire cult. I've devoted a chapter to that case in this book that we're going to talk about today.
Well, let's start with that one. Tell us about the vampire cult. Is this that famous one from years ago, or is it something more recent?
Yes, it is.
Ooh.
Yes, and what happened there was this guy named Rod Farrell. He was 16 years old. He'd gone to high school here in Lake County, and then his family moved back to Murray, Kentucky. So then he's into this vampire thing. It was big back in '96, with Tom Cruise movie, Interview with a Vampire and all that sort of thing. So, and he gets this little cult thing going, and they are all drinking each other's blood and conjuring up demons, they think, and all this other kind of stuff. He comes down, pick up one of his cult members, kills her parents, and she leaves with the group. And they're arrested 3 days later. Everybody's charged but the girl. I mean, she's not indicted, is what I mean. She goes before the grand jury, but the grand jury cuts her loose. So the state wants to have the death penalty, and they convict him of all this crazy stuff. But the Florida Supreme Court says, no, he's too young. But I've been covering the case for over 25 years because he just recently came back for a resentencing hearing. Says, the Supreme Court keeps moving the ball. They say, well, you can't send a juvenile to a life sentence without special considerations, blah, blah, blah. So Rod and all these other characters get a rehearing, so it's interesting.
Without special circumstances, like it's not enough that you're a vampire and you're drinking people's blood and you're killing people with your little gang of cult members there. Now, what about a couple of questions? Wasn't there something with Rod Farrell's mother that she was also into this cult? And
she was.
Yeah.
Yes, she was. And one of the psychologists that testified, the defense psychologist, who testified or had looked into like 700 cases, said this is the most dysfunctional family I've ever seen.
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy. I mean, Rod says he was molested or raped, I should say, by one of his grandfather's friends in some kind of secret cult ritual, and his father was absent, from his life, and his mother let him take drugs and drop out of school and all this sort of thing. So it was just a crazy trial. And then everybody thought initially, the prosecutor and the defense attorney said, well, this has nothing to do with vampirism. okay. And then as soon as the trial starts, it's all about vampirism. That was the defense, that he was under the influence of the occult, and that he had a horrible childhood and all this sort of thing. So that's what it became about. But this is one of those cases where we covered every single scrap of paper, every hearing, everything. We sent reporters to Kentucky, to Louisiana where they were captured, and all this sort of things. It was like never had covered such a thing as this. And of course, me being the court reporter for the Sentinel, and then for other papers later, I became the sort of the expert, if you will, in this case.
Now, have you had the opportunity to speak with Farrell?
I asked for an interview with him, and it was funny, not really funny, but so I made an interview request at the jail, and this is back in the day. I didn't have a cell phone at the time. So I said, call me at this number at the office, and I waited and waited and waited, and then I left, and then he calls. And then so two other reporters got this interview, which was okay in the long run because those reporters got subpoenaed, and I was subpoenaed too. But if I had to testify, I wouldn't have been able to cover the trial. So I was desperate to cover the trial. So it worked out all right.
Now,
but he claimed he had multiple personalities, that he had special blackout moments, and then he blamed his co-defendant, and then he blamed this rival vampire cult up in Kentucky, his friend up in Kentucky. So it was like he was all over the place. It was pretty crazy.
Now, how is he doing now? How is he getting along in prison?
Well, it's funny because he has groupies.
Right.
He has all these females that come and visit him and send pictures and all this sort of thing. One girl at the most recent rehearing in 2019, this girl pipes up, says, "Well, I'm his fiancée." Now, Rod had been married once before, supposedly behind bars. There's no conjugal visits in Florida, so. But she says, I'm his fiancée, I'll make sure he gets a job, and all this sort of thing. So she seemed like a nice person. She was a teacher in Texas, had done a lot of civic type work and so on. But it's like, oh, brother, okay then.
Yeah, that's such an odd phenomenon, these women attracted to these, and men too, men that are attracted to these prisoners. Now, what about his
it is.
Yeah, the co-defendants, the other conspirators in these crimes? What is going on with their? Are they out?
Well, two of the girls that came down with him, including his girlfriend, they're out. His co-defendant that went in the house with him, the murder house, and by the way, that was just awful. Mm-hmm. He bludgeoned these people just repeatedly with a crowbar. It was just the most horrific crime scene. But the guy that went in the house with him, Scott Anderson, pleaded guilty for a life sentence because he was afraid he was going to be executed. So more recently, he had his sentence reduced to 40 years. So he gets out in like 2032, something like that. He was kind of a goofy follower, kind of a character. All these members in this cult were came from dysfunctional families. There was like one girl who was kind of overweight and had a dead-end kind of retail job, and she said she had no friends. Nobody was coming over. But when she joined this cult, then people were coming by to check on her, and she had friends and all that. So she became a vampire to have friends. It was sad.
Yeah, how sad is that? Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Now, what about the girl whose parents were killed? What turn did her life take? Did she get back involved with these kind of people or straight life?
Well, what she did, first of all, they had the grand jury hearing for her, special hearing for her, and they cut her loose. The grand jury says, look, what she did was wrong in leaving with these people and associating with these people and all that, but it wasn't illegal. she said that she didn't know her parents were going to be harmed. So they cut her loose. Well, the sheriff was having none of it. He was convinced that she had something to do with, being a principal to murder. So after Rod Farrell's trial and everybody else pleaded out, the judge says to the prosecutor, "Mr. Prosecutor, I think you ought to call another grand jury." So they call another grand jury, and they cut her loose again. And then she took off for North Carolina and Georgia. She was an odd person. Heather Wendorf was her name. She was 15. She was one of these artiste types, She wore fishnet stockings and dyed her hair kind of crazy colors, and she hung a Barbie with a noose off of her backpack. Did all these other wild things, kind of drawing attention to herself. So she was an artiste, and Rod, he was an artistic guy too. He would draw and he would make up these stories and all that. So they had an artistic temperament, but it was just too wild.
Did she ever get into trouble again in her life?
No, she got married. She went to an art school in North Carolina, and then she got married, had children and all that. So you could find her on Facebook and stuff.
Really?
She's kind of changed her name a little bit. She used to go by Zoe. She spells it differently now. So she's got this nice artwork and all this sort of thing, and she's it's funny because how you can list your favorite movies and all that, or favorite movie is Dracula.
Wow. And
she gave an interview to the Sentinel a few years ago. Says, "I'm still not the happy sunshine girl," So there's that. But her letters that the police found were all about this hideous personality, split in two. I feel like, sinking my teeth in a baby's neck, and all this sort of thing. It was like really just out there.
Okay, incredible stuff, and you could find out more of that if you pick up the book called Cold Blooded. Let me see. Cold Blood, right. A true crime story of murderous teenage vampire cult. I was going to ask you one other thing. Oh yeah, I was going to say, how'd she get into that college? Probably because she was an orphan, right? That they had a special program for her.
Yeah, I guess maybe they have a special scholarship for vampires. I'm not sure.
Yeah, if you kill your own parents, they have a special scholarship for you. Hey, that's what's next. Now, this is Lake County. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's her story. She didn't know her parents are going to be harmed, so that was her story. So, and she's sticking to it. So. That's what that's all about.
So now you're based in Lake County, right? And you were telling me off the air that I would be surprised at all the crazy stuff that goes on down there, these murders and police corruption and stuff.
Yeah, it used to be you would have like maybe one major trial a year, maybe two or something, But now I've got a file cabinet just full of names. I can't even keep track of all the murders and stuff. It's absolutely crazy. But it's always been kind of nutty. I mean, people from the office in Orlando would call me and say, "What is it about Lake County? Is it the water or what?" People are, and I would just say, "Well, eat your heart out," because it's just crazy. But and some of it's funny. Some of these stories in this Vampires and Wackos book is funny. People do the strangest things. Like one night, the cops roll up on this guy walking down the road naked, and he turns around and says, "It's not as bad as it looks." And so the cop says, "No, it looks pretty bad. You're get in the car. You're going to jail." Just weird stuff. But there's also really awful cases in this book too. One of them was some kids that were teenagers, and they were going around. They wanted to, quote unquote, do an old person.
Wow.
So they broke in and stabbed this poor man to death, and they attacked another woman in her home, and they stabbed a woman racing. She was a race walker. She was injured, but So there was another one of these cases, and that was pretty obvious that it was a break-in and somebody had killed this old man. But the cops I got a tip that the cop says, no, it's just it's a natural, because the man was old. He was like 84 or something, and he had a pacemaker. But the evidence, the tip I got, and the evidence showed that it was definitely murder. So I kept doing all these investigative stories. Finally pressured the prosecutor to exhume the body, and they found out, yes, he was a murder victim because his pacemaker acted just the opposite from what it's supposed to do. So they said, oh, no, he's a homicide victim. And then the kid that killed him confessed and was convicted of murder. So it's just strange, the things that go on here. Absolutely strange.
You know, one thing that struck me since I moved down here, especially this is a location for spring break. Right now, I've got a bunch of spring breakers in town. It's a pain in the ass. But you see these young girls, college kids, who come down here for spring break and other vacations, and they talk about, hey, do you have a boat? They want to go out on a boat with a stranger. Right? Now, to me, that seems like the craziest thing in the world. Do you see a lot of those girls turning up missing and no explanation for that kind of thing?
Absolutely. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Florida is full of Jane Does. Yeah. Absolutely full. In fact, one of the stories in this Wackos book is about a Jane Doe they found in the woods, and she was so mauled that they thought she had been attacked by a bear. At first, and so they didn't know who did it. They never did find out who she was. Still don't know. But because what happens is all these people come to Florida. They have no family, and down here, and right. So they just get themselves in all kind of trouble. Well, this case was interesting because it was the first time that they found the killer's DNA in the computer crime lab. That was the first time that happened. So they matched the DNA they found on the body to this convicted rapist, and so that was interesting. But yeah, this place it's full of those kind of cases. And people dump them in the swamps and the rivers and the ocean. The ocean is,
yeah.
And we're near the Ocala National Forest. And so the joke is that when Jesus comes back, there'll be a lot of bodies flying up out of the forest because it's just a murder ground.
It also seems to be like a high concentration of sex offenders and child sex offenders.
Oh, yeah. That's a horrible problem. And it's with the computers situation, this stuff is just everywhere. So we get a lot of that. And I think the cops are trying to do something about it, but I think they're just scratching the surface, if anything, really. Yeah. It's awful. Yeah, and it's like a lot of times it's not strangers that's doing this stuff. It's family members and stuff. More recently, I had a case where the son of this old sheriff we used to have, he was convicted of child porn and showing child porn. Well, this is weird. He was convicted of showing child porn to this kid and touching her inappropriately, but not convicted of child porn. Which, like, hello, I don't understand this case, but all right. Juries come up with compromised verdicts sometimes, but so he's going to prison for life. So I don't know. It's just messed up. I don't get it.
It really is. I think they're attracted to come down here because of the weather, and sex offenders from other states come down here. I was talking to someone who investigates these kind of cases not too long ago, and he was telling me that these laws that they've passed about 1,000 feet away from a school that you can't, a sex offender can't live, within 1,000 feet, and they want to increase it to 2,500 feet. And what happens is in smaller towns where, there's only 3 or 4 schools and they're all close by, the town is small, it causes these sex offenders to move out into rural areas where now the cops can't keep an eye on them, like they can't, they're not driving by all the time. So it's really, and then, so to another guest, and he was telling me about how, well then, they have to put them, all these convicted sex offenders, they have to put them all up in housing in a motel. So now they're all living with each other. The only friends they have, their own neighbors, are involved in the same exact crimes they got convicted of. It's like everything we do to address this problem is the exact opposite of what we should be doing.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. It really is.
Now, what you mentioned? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, one of the cases in this Wackos book, these two girls had been raped by their biological father for years, and he leaves the family finally. But the mom says, well, she encouraged them at one time to keep a diary. And then he comes back to the family, he remarries mom. Mom destroys the diaries, and the girls have had enough. You know, they come forward and reveal all this stuff, horrible stuff that's happened to them. So it turns out that while he had left the family, he went up to Tennessee and got caught having sex with this young girl. So he paid the girl's father with a pickup truck and some acreage, and then promised to marry her. Well, then he married her, but then soon divorced her. She was like 14 or something like that.
Oh, my God.
The whole thing, it's just, and it was in the, the story was in the National Enquirer, which is interesting too. But it was like, oh my goodness, it's sad. It's just sad, the stuff that goes on.
So what do you think it is? You hear these stories, Florida man, you know, and that is true, you know. Like when you Google Florida man, you know, like the craziest crimes and the weirdest things. Why is Florida attracting so many bizarre? And I know it's like Sunshine State. There's body cams on the cops. All this stuff is more available. I get that, but there does seem to be a higher percentage of strange people here.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. California's gotten too expensive. So everybody's coming to Florida. I mean, you're right. It's the weather, and people are disconnected. They don't have their family here. They're just disconnected. It used to be not uncommon at all. Still goes on, I guess. You would see a whole family load everything they could cram into their junker car and drive down to Orlando thinking that the streets were paved with gold and they'd get a job at Disney and everything would be great. And then they'd find out, well, you know, maybe not. You know, now they're stuck. They don't have any money. They don't have a job. They don't have their family here. So what now? And then they get themselves into trouble. Of course, now I think it's even worse because of the drugs. A lot of these funny stories about like the guy walking down the road naked. I think alcohol and drugs are involved in a lot of that. It was funny. One case was the cops get a call in the middle of the night here in Leesburg about a plane buzzing houses like at 2:00 in the morning. And so they go out to the airport. This plane lands, and everybody's naked on the plane.
Oh my God!
It's like 6 people on the plane. And they're trying to cover up and so on. And the pilot says, hey, no, nothing to see here. Nothing's going on. He says, we were just... Hello?
Okay, Frank. Okay, we got you back.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened there. We got lost.
Yeah, we're talking to Frank Stanfield and we're talking about his book, Vampires, Gators, and Wackos, A Florida Newspaperman's Life. So, Frank, when we got cut off there, you were telling us about this airplane where everyone on the plane was naked. Okay, you want to finish that up? And then we'll take a commercial break.
Yeah. Basically, the call to the cops was somebody's buzzing houses.
Right.
And apparently what was happening was he wasn't paying attention to what he was doing. So when they got there, everybody on the plane was naked. And he says, well, nothing going on. We were just out looking out the windows. So... So usually drugs and alcohol are involved in these kind of stories. So that's why you have so much Florida man, because there's a lot of news media down here, and it's a rich environment. And what can I say?
Well, Frank, let me ask a question real quick before we go. Did you ever look into all that stuff with the flight schools down there in Venice, of the 9/11 flight schools and Rudy Decker and Muhammad Atta and all that stuff?
Yeah, apparently that was actually true. And obviously, since that happened, they've really tightened up on that kind of thing. It's really scary, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a fascinating story. A friend of mine did a lot of work on that story and actually took me down, gave me a tour of all those flight schools and all that stuff. We're talking today to a local reporter, a Florida reporter, Frank Stanfield, a true crime author. First, we were talking about one of his books called Cold-Blooded, a true crime story of a murderous teenage vampire cult, which people know is the story of Rod Farrell. I'm surprised I didn't contact you previous to this and try to get you to come on about that. And then today we're talking about vampires, gators, and wackos, a Florida newspaperman's life. So, Mr. Stanfield, you had mentioned one of the stories in the book was a teacher that was too pretty to go to jail.
Yeah. Listen, why don't you talk about the internet sensation? This was it. What happened was this teacher over in your area, St. Petersburg area, Tampa, I think. She was having sex with a 15-year-old student. She had it in her apartment. Then she had Deb LaFave, that was her name. And this was back in 2004. And then she had sex in the car in this SUV while her cousin was driving down I-75. So, and around in Marion County. So what happened was she got caught, of course, and then she went on the Today Show and blamed it on the kid, saying he was the aggressor. You know, that didn't go over very well with his mother. Then her lawyer, says, well, look, she's basically, he says, she's too pretty to go to jail. He says, and she was pretty. She was very pretty, but she was one of these people that, the porch light was on, but, like, nobody was home. You know what I'm saying? It was like you could look into those big baby blues, and it was like nobody's there. So it was kind of crazy. So let me see if I can find the quote. So basically he said, putting her in jail would be like throwing in prison, would be like throwing a piece of meat to a bunch of lionesses. So there you go. So I've never heard of a too pretty to go to jail defense before, so I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I recall that case now, and she was very pretty, just like you said. But it makes you wonder, like, who would risk everything, going to jail, and just over a few fleeting moments with a student? Just says the craziest thing in the world.
It is. He was married and had a good job, and obviously had some intelligence about her and stuff. But people do the craziest things. It really is nuts.
So I had a guest on this show once who did a documentary film about a woman in Lakeland who had a pet alligator inside her home. Okay, you know that story?
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so you have some stories about alligators too. It's even amazing we have to talk about alligators at all. But what do you have to tell us about alligators going on here in Florida?
Yeah, Florida, of course, is, again, rich in wildlife. We've got every kind of snake you can think of, including exotic snakes. We've got alligators, we've got sharks, we've got coyotes, we've got bears, we've got everything. And so we had this, used to have a cable show with the Sentinel, local cable show, and we did a story on alligators once because tragically over in Volusia County, this one alligator had basically eaten a little boy at the edge of the water. He was playing, and then there was a splash of water. He was gone. Just awful. So those kind of things still go on. So I talk about that, but sometimes the stories are kind of funny. And anyway, doing this story, we met with game and fish people, me and a photographer, and we're talking about alligators, and a 3-footer swims up to the boat, and the game and fish guy says, "Hey, do you want me to grab him and for your show?" I said, "Yeah, sure, grab him." So we're filming. He's describing the alligator. Meanwhile, the little gator is like crying out for his mother, I think, squeaking and carrying on. So the wind is blowing us out to the middle of Lake Griffin, which is a huge lake. It's full of gators too. So finally we get done, and he says, well, I can't let the guy out here in the middle of the lake. He says, so, because he'll just be eaten by the other alligators. So he says, here, you hold him. I'm going, say what now? And so I'm holding this alligator, and he's like flipping around and trying to get away. And the photographer is laughing so hard I thought she was going to fall overboard. So, but they're very interesting creatures. But if you just leave them alone, basically. But people do the dumbest things. They'll go swimming, skinny dipping at dusk when they like to eat. They take their dogs out by the lake, and they love to eat dogs. One story is about a guy who jumped in to save his dog and was beaten up on the alligator. He and the dog have some bite marks, but they survive, and it's just crazy stuff that goes on. So they're everywhere.
What about that whole story with Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin? Did you run across any of that in all your reporting?
No, that was after I wrote this book, but no, that's a very interesting case. I have my own opinions on that one, but I'll keep those to myself. Yeah,
maybe a chapter 2 you could have Wackos and Joe Exotic. But I accidentally, when I first came to Florida, I wrote her an email saying, hey, I'd like to come down, take a tour, and do a show about your rescue. I had no idea what Joe Exotic was or what the TV show was. And she wrote me back. I would say it was about a 10-paragraph email back. Pretty much, I didn't even ask her about all this stuff, but she was explaining away all the allegations against her. It was kind of a bizarre situation there. But everything down here in Florida is pretty bizarre.
It is. I have a theory that the sun comes out and bakes everybody's brain. That's kind of what's going on, I think, partly.
That's true. And I moved here from Vegas. I lived, I was born in New York, then Vegas, and I came here. And everyone looks at Vegas, Sin City, the drinking and the smoking. But I got to tell you, I've never seen more drinking and smoking than down here in Florida. And everyone down here is obsessed with those lottery tickets. You're online at the 7-Eleven for 2 hours.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because right up the road here is the Villages, and everybody's heard of the Villages. This massive mega retirement community. It's very nice. It's very upscale. A lot of people there come down here from Michigan or whatever. They sell their house up there and come down and pay for a $250,000 house and think that's a cheap deal. That's a good deal, and so on. Well, then there's sinkholes, not necessarily a lot of them, but there's sinkholes, there's hurricanes. Back in 2007, there was a horrific tornado in that area. Not in the Villages but the little town next to it that killed 21 people. And that was just awful. I went and covered that thing. So they get a little surprised, I think, sometimes up Florida. They get more than they bargain for, I think.
Okay, I can agree.
They love it.
I can testify.
They do love, and they all have a golf cart, and they all drive those golf carts on highways and everything else. Like, oh my goodness, you just hold your breath. Nobody's going to get killed because they're drinking. Drinking real heavily.
One time, I'm driving down Tamiami in Bradenton, and this guy is driving in the street a lawnmower with this woman on the back with short shorts and a tank top, and she's hanging on his back, and they're driving down the road on a sitting lawnmower. I tell you, Florida is like nowhere else in the world. That's a fact.
True. It's true. The other day, yesterday, I think it was, there was a woman arrested in the Villages. The call was an accident of some kind. So she wasn't in a golf cart. She was in a car. So they get there, and there's car parts all over the road. They're looking for the driver, and then they see this woman. She's like 37 years old. She's off to the side. Her pants are down. She's urinating. And so the cops are trying to talk to her, and she says, she asks him, do you want to see my underwear? And then they're still trying to talk to her and see what's going on, and she's reeking of alcohol, of course. And then she's wetting herself, and then she says, I don't have to do anything you say, and I've got the best lawyer in town. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on.
You wrote this other book called Unbroken, the Dorothy Lewis story. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, Dorothy is something else. She is an amazing person. In 1993, she was a young widow, African-American widow, and she took her 2 little girls to a grocery store over in Eustis, where the vampire thing happened, by the way. And she was carjacked by these 2 teenagers. She was taken out into the woods, and they promised her. They said, well, just do what we say, nobody will get hurt. They take her out to the woods and to this field, basically, and rape her and shoot her 4 times, once in the knee, 3 times in the head, once right between the eyes with a .22. She comes to, the car is gone, the girls are gone. They had murdered the little girls.
Oh.
And Dorothy is a person of tremendous faith, and she has a very big supportive family. So the story is really about how her faith carried her through, along with her family. And people said, but you're like Job in the Bible. And she says, I'm not like Job, and it used to make her mad. I don't want to be Job, and I don't want to be Job's wife, and which is understandable. But then I said, Dorothy, maybe they're on to something here. So I talked to a theologian out in Texas about who Job was and all the terrible things that happened to him. And she says, well, in that case, maybe I'm honored to be called like this. She was able to forgive these people, and they executed the older kid. And she didn't want that to happen. She said, that's not going to bring my girls back. She's just an incredible Christian woman. She's the epitome of a Christian woman. The judge told me, he says, Frank, you and I couldn't deal with this like her. And he's right. So it's like, wow, just incredible person.
Now, she's still alive and around today?
Yeah, and no effects. And here's the thing, too. She got married later and had a miracle son. She had been on medicine because she had some seizures. She got off the medicine, then she got pregnant, and she had this wonderful son who's now on a lot of TV movies and stuff like that. So it's just a miracle, it's just incredible. Wonderful story. It's an uplifting story, even though it's a horrible crime, You don't get that very much, so that's why I like that book.
Gotcha. Hey, real quick, back to the Rod Farrell story, because I was always fascinated by that. Was there ever any indications that he was influenced by a larger cult rather than these young teens that he was manipulating?
Well, he was part of there was a bunch of these kids in Kentucky, including his best friend, who was like 1 or 2 years older than him. But there wasn't, so there were a bunch of kids involved in it. But, influenced by them, I suppose. Yeah, the guy was kind of a mentor to him. They called him the Prince of the City. He was a real character. He comes down and he testifies in the trial, and he sticks his tongue out and says, look, see, I don't have any fangs. I know I'm immortal. I will die. I don't have a fear of garlic and all that sort of thing. So he gave an interview to me. I'd been talking to him on the phone quite a bit before the trial. So he gave me an interview, and he says, I knew that it wasn't a vampire thing because Rod didn't bleed the bodies. Oh my God, man, what these people are just. And so I've been on several shows like Discovery ID and Oxygen and all that sort of thing. And this character has been on some of those shows too. But he's still. And so the question is he still a vampire? Good question. He said earlier that he was. If you go to his rehearing, he probably said, no, I'm not. But, is he or not? He claimed he was a Christian now, or then he says, "Oh no, I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish now," and all this stuff. But that's when he said he had a fiance and was going to turn his life around and all that jazz. So
now, what about
the problem with Rod is you can't believe anything he says.
Yeah,
he's got such a history of lying. Although sometimes he tells the truth. He confessed right away to the cops in Baton Rouge where they caught him. You know, he says, "I did it," and he says, "I took great pleasure in it." You know, all that kind of stuff. It was a rush. It was like being a god. Mm-hmm. And when that jury saw that videotape, they looked at him from across the room and go, "Okay, then." Really, just like, who are you? You know.
And now, what about he had made these allegations about his father or his family members being into this occult, and he was involved with some kind of ritual? Did you take any stock in that?
His father basically abandoned him, because he says he had such a difficulty of dealing with his mother. Here's the thing: he played Dungeons and Dragons with him when he was little, and then he left. Well, during the trial, it was really kind of sad. His dad refused to look at him, and so Rod's over there, he's crying, and his dad refused to even acknowledge him. That was pretty sobering.
And so, Rod made the claim that his grandfather involved him in some kind of a ritual abuse?
Yeah. When he was like 5, he said that his grandfather was in this cult, they call it the Black Mask, and that he was made a human sacrifice, and they raped him and all this sort of thing. So he may have had some kind of sexual abuse done to him. I don't know that it's that kind of thing, that kind of fantasy, but here's the thing: you get into trial, and I've got a trial this week of a guy they all have a story. They all have a terrible childhood, yeah, which is bad, and so on. But he knew right from wrong. Is the thing. He knew right. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but he just wanted to kill somebody. All the way down from Kentucky, he says, "I want to kill somebody. I want to kill somebody." And some of these girls says they just didn't put a lot of stock in what he was saying because he's always talking smack like that. You know, they just didn't believe it. So, but that was a fantasy of his.
Yeah, what a tragedy. We're just about out of time. So we've been discussing the different books here with Frank Stanfield, Vampires, Gators, and Wackos, and Newspaperman's Life, and then more detail into the Rod Ferrell cold-blooded true crime story of a murderous teenage vampire cult, and then this other story about this woman, Dorothy Lewis, Unbroken, the Dorothy Lewis story. So Mr. Stanfield, in the next, what would you like to leave us with about your life down here in Florida and these different topics you've been covering?
Well, it's interesting because people come down here and, like, especially they go to Disney. They're the sun shines in their eyes, and they see all this wonderful, happy, stuff, and the shrubbery formed and look like animals, and it's beautiful and all that, but they're forgetting to turn around and pay attention to the guy with a lead pipe following on them and that kind of thing. So it's just like, just be careful and keep your eyes and ears open, and there are crazy people down here too. So
yeah, it's like that movie, The Florida Project, about the young lady and the little daughter that live in that motel down there in Orlando, just bouncing around from motel to motel. Like you said, they come down here and there's no work. Well, now there's plenty of work, but still, some people just can't function. So once again, Frank Stanfield, you could find him on his website, frankestanfield.com. You can find him on Facebook, just Frank Stanfield, and also too on Twitter at Frank Stanfield. Mr. Stanfield, thank you so much for coming on at the last second there. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.